Hey, what's going on, everyone? I am producer, mixer, and engineer Nick Battistone, and welcome to another exciting tutorial on mixing and recording rap and hip-hop in Pro Tools. Today I'm going to walk you through creating custom I/O settings. Custom I/O settings can help speed up your workflow and avoid a lot of confusion when working in large sessions. They're also helpful when working in sessions of any size when you start to build up a lot of aux tracks for effects sends or group buses. We've all had sessions where we set up multiple reverbs, delays, and other effects, or have worked to put together aux inputs for group buses such as vocals buses, drums buses, and effects buses. When you start to accumulate a lot of aux tracks, it starts to become confusing when you have multiple bus inputs in use. There's many times where I've been mixing in a session where I've come across a vocal track and I go to assign it an effects send for a reverb and I can't remember which bus that I've put it on. Well, creating custom I/O settings allows you to label the names of your buses. As opposed to being bus 1, 2, or bus 3, 4, you can now label it Vox Reverb or Vox Delay or whatever it is that you commonly use in your sessions. That way, when you're going to assign an effect to one of your audio tracks, it's easy to select your sends and go to your bus menu and see a list of all of your custom settings and names for your buses. So in order to try and make this tutorial short, we'll go ahead and jump right in. Now, I will say, depending on what version of Pro Tools you're running, and any expansion packs or upgrades you may have, will depend on the amount of buses you have available in your particular setup. Now, I'm working on Pro Tools 9 HD, so I have up to 128 auxiliary buses. However, if you're working on Pro Tools LE, you might have 24, 32, or up to 48, or so on and so forth, depending on if you have the Music Production Toolkit or Complete Production Toolkits or some of the other upgrades. So let's go ahead and jump right in. First thing you're going to do is click on the Setup and go down to the I/O selection, which will open the I/O Setup menu. Now, first things first, to make sure that we're working with a clean palette and we don't have any overlapping buses, inputs, or outputs, let's go ahead and select Default. This will restore all of your bus settings to the factory default. Now, if you open sessions from other producers or from other studios or things that recorded on other systems, they may have altered your bus settings in order to preserve the signal routing in the session. So clicking Default ensures that we don't have any overlapping buses and there won't be any problems later on. Let's also go to the Input and Output tabs and do the same thing. Now, back under the bus menu, what we're going to do is we're going to start naming our buses. Now, again, if you've worked with session templates before, or you have a pretty good idea of the types of aux tracks that you commonly use in your sessions, it's good to go ahead and build a list of all of those to label your buses. So that way you can make sure that if you're ever setting up a particular reverb or a particular effect that you use commonly, that you have a bus setting for it. It's also a good idea to save a couple of buses towards the end for whatever kind of spur-of-the-moment signal routing decisions that you make in your sessions. Again, if when you're working with a lot of buses like in Pro Tools HD, it might not be so beneficial to leave it as bus 127-bus 128. You might just want to go ahead and change it to like send B or send C, which we'll go ahead and do here in a moment. So first things first, once you've compiled a list of the common auxiliary tracks that you use, effect sends and group buses and such, let's go ahead up to the first bus option and double click to open up the text box. I'll go ahead and backspace out, and we'll go ahead and just use the effects that I have set in this session template, which we've created in a previous tutorial. A Vox Reverb and a Vox Delay, a Plate Reverb, a Room Reverb, 3 separate delays, both quarter note, eighth note, and 16th note, as well as 1 effects track. I also have group buses set for the music, for the verse vocals, the ad-libs, and the hook vocals. I also generally have an independent group bus for my drums as well. So let's go ahead and create some labels for these. I'll start off with the Vox Reverb. Now you can go ahead and select the Tab key to move on to the next bus. Now we're at bus 3, 4. Let's go ahead and make a Vox Delay. Now we'll make a Plate Reverb, a Room Reverb, and a Hall Reverb. Let's also go ahead and make a Gated Reverb and a Chamber Reverb. Now we'll create several buses for our delay. you can label them and the speed of the delay or the timing of the delay. So you can have delay quarter, delay 8, delay 16, or you can just kind of give them generic delay settings such as delay 1, delay 2, delay 3, and so on. That's usually how I work, considering I might have multiple 16th note delays in my session if I'm using a delay with a lot of feedback and maybe a delay that I put some sort of modulation on, both with the same timing. So I just choose to go ahead and create several bland delay buses and assign those to my delay tracks. Let's go ahead and create delay 1, delay 2, delay 3, delay 4, and we'll make a delay 5. Okay, next thing is I create some generic effects buses. You never know what kind of creative decisions you're going to be making in your sessions, and you don't want to leave yourself without options for assigning buses and having some sort of preset bus assignment so it's easy to find your effects tracks when you're scrolling through and trying to assign sends. So I just go ahead and create a generic effects 1 and effects 2 setting. Now if you work with a lot of effects, you can create more of these, or if you don't even have to create any at all. Again, this is entirely up to your own workflow. I'm just kind of giving you a basic setup of how I like to work. Actually, in all of my actual professional hip-hop mix sessions, I actually take advantage of all 128 buses, whether they be for grouping, subgrouping, all of my effects, as well as other signal routing that I do with inside of Pro Tools. Okay, so now we'll just go ahead and create some basic group buses. Let's go ahead and create a Vocals bus. And then we'll create sub-buses for that, being verse vocals, ad-libs, and dub vocals. And we'll create a hooks vocals. Okay, now we'll create a music bus and a drums bus. Okay, now that we have some generic, basic group buses set up, you can create as many sub-buses as you like to work with. If you are like me and you like to create multiple sub-buses and subgroups in your mixes, then you can create individual buses for the strings, for the synths, for the pads, for horns, or whatever. It's entirely up to you and how many bus tracks you have available. Again, if it's not something that you do in your mix, there's no point in wasting your time going ahead and doing these assignments. This is all about creating custom settings for your workflow. Again, I'm just kind of showing you a quick, generic method of doing such. Okay, now that we have our group buses set up, like I said, I like to create some available buses for any other operations that I might do in Pro Tools. For example, I will create a click 1 and a click 2 for any click tracks that I might import into my sessions. I will also do some sends for any, say I decide to send the kick drum out to the keyed input of a gate on my bass or a compressor on my bass. I will need some sort of available bus to do so with, so I'll do send 1, send 2, send 3, or send 4. These also come in handy if you create other effects or auxiliary tracks in your session that don't fit any of the other predetermined buses that you set up. You have some extras set aside that you can use without having to again resort to using bus 55, 56. It just makes it a lot easier to keep things organized and remember what you're doing. Lastly, I'll also create some extra group settings just in case I decide to do any submixes beneath my drums. Maybe I break off, there might be multiple snares and claps that I put together in a subgroup. So we'll just go ahead and create group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. And again, you kind of get the idea here, and that's pretty much all I wanted to show you, is how to set these up, how to create some custom settings, and how to work through the custom I/O setup. Now, lastly, we're going to go ahead and, this is especially important for those of you who are beginners. This will make things a lot easier. If you go to your outputs, find your main output. This would be the output in which Pro Tools defaults to, your master fader output, and the output in which your main studio monitors or speakers are connected to. This is the main output of your entire mix. Generally speaking, 90% of the time, it's out 1, 2. But considering, some people have third-party hardware nowadays that allows multiple inputs, it could get confusing for some beginners. So once you've found your main outputs for your system and for your hardware, I always like to go ahead and just change the name to main out 1-2. That way there's no confusion, and you can be sure when you're looking in your session and looking at your master fader, if something says that it's outputting to the main output, that it's going to the right output. Okay, now that all of our buses are set, again, I have multiple left over, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's, again, like I said, all to your workflow and what you like to do. So now, in order to recall these, and anytime you want to use them, or in any session you want to use them, we need to export. So let's go ahead and click Export, and this will open up the Export and Save window here. Now, it should default you to Pro Tools I/O Settings folder. This is where Pro Tools automatically saves all of its default preset I/O settings, as well as any custom settings. Essentially, you could save them anywhere you like. If you're going to be, say, taking your I/O settings to another studio and you'd like to recall them on their system, you could save these to a thumb drive or to a folder in your mix session. You can even save your I/O settings right in your project folders. So that way, if you've created a custom I/O setting for a project or for a series of sessions, you can save your I/O settings right in those subfolders, so that way you could be sure anytime you open your session that your I/O settings are right there with your session and easy to recall. I'm just going to go ahead and save this to the default, and since this is for the tutorial, I'll just put tutorial I/O. You can label this whatever you like. If you're working predominantly on your laptop and this is your hip-hop I/O settings, you could put laptop hip-hop or whatever you'd like to call it. You can see that I have my Mac Pro settings, as well as my mobile settings, my music production. I even have rock music settings, and my hip hop settings for Pro Tools HD. So now you can go ahead and click Save, and everything is saved within your presets folder. Now, lastly, I'll show you how to import those settings. But before we do that, let's go ahead and click OK. So those I/O settings are applied to this session. Now, if you want to import your I/O settings into any new sessions you open, or any recording tracks or mixes that you're working on, just go ahead and click Setup, back down to the I/O selection to reopen the I/O setup. And just as we exported the settings, select Import, and it will open up the same presets folder, and you can select the I/O settings that you just recently saved, click Open. It will ask if you want to delete any existing unused paths, which you will select yes, so you don't have any overlapping buses or outputs. And then once those settings are opened, scroll through to make sure they're all accurate, and go ahead and click OK. Now those I/O settings have been applied to your session. Now, let's go down here to the Aux reverb, set an input like we would with any other effects. Now, as opposed to having to select one of these random generically labeled buses, you can scroll through and see you now have a bus setting for your Aux reverb. Very easy. Now, say you're on your vocal track and you want to send to your Aux reverb, no longer do you have to try and remember which bus it was on and try and keep a mental list of all of your buses and inputs, or have to scroll back through the window. When you go to send your reverb or set up your effect, just scroll down, and there it is, highlighted in yellow to let you know that it's an active bus. Select Aux reverb, and there you go. That also helps you keep organized when you're mixing by being able to look at an audio track at its sends menu and see what effects you have inserted. When they're all properly labeled, it's easy to tell that, oh, I have a reverb on this vocal and I have 2 delays. So that way, if you're hearing in your mix this delay that's just trailing off too long and it's overwhelming in your mix, that way you can go through quickly and figure out which tracks you have delays assigned to find where the problem area is. And that way you're not looking at your sends saying, oh, it's bus 3-4 and bus 5-6 and I don't know what's what. It's very easy to keep things organized. Okay, so this has been a quick tutorial on setting up custom I/O settings in Pro Tools. As always, please stay tuned to my channel. Please subscribe. I encourage you to. I will be creating new tutorials all the time. This week has been very busy with a lot of mix projects, so I haven't had a chance. But hopefully later on this week I'll get a few more out there. I do have a big series coming on mixing and mastering in hip hop, particularly working on hip hop and rap vocals, which is going to be a very awesome multi-part tutorial coming later this week. So again, please stay tuned, everybody, and I thank you for stopping by. I am producer, mixer, and engineer Nick Battistone, and I hope you guys are out there creating some kick-ass mixes. As always, you can send me an email, which will be in the description below, for any questions or suggestions for future tutorials, or to even contact me about booking for mix work. All right, everybody, take care and have a good one.